no, I like Lutheran Answers because we need a response to Catholic answers, but
Yeah,
nobody's doing it. And I was like, well, I mean, that was my original goal, but dude, blog posts, articles, Q&A, podcasts, videos, like it's so much content, and I have a full-time job, it's too much.
The problem
So
I've run into is any group project. If you've been in school before and you have a group project, you usually got one guy who does all the work. I've tried cooperating with other people on stuff before, and a lot of times it's like, hey, are you ever going to get me that thing? You were supposed to record a response to this question like last week, and they say, well, I just had 2 baptisms and a funeral and stuff, and you have to understand that people are going to be busy, but at the same time, like sooner or later, I was like, you know what, that's my thing. This channel, I got my dad to do the the intro music for mine, the bump music, and I paid some guy on Fiverr. I paid him to, and I worked out the logo and I did a little bit of tweaking on it. But at the end of the day, I'm like, all right, well, you see, Rev Wolf Miller, he's got his thing. He records, he Sunday drive home or whatever. And I'm like, all right, well, I could do that. I mean, a lot of pastors can do that. If I've already written this sermon, all I'm doing is recording it and sharing it with another audience. So I said, all right, well, the amount of benefit that I could get from sharing my sermon in a second source versus the amount of extra effort I would have to put in for a sermon that I already wrote. It's just, I mean, there was no reason not to do it, especially since, COVID, everyone's online. But so I've told other pastors to do the same thing, but they're like, I record my sermon in the pulpit anyway. So I record my entire service. I'm like, yeah, but you don't have like a whole like alter ego that you you jump into online.
Do you mind if I like link this to your YouTube channel and all that?
Sure. Okay? I mean, yeah, I could put it up there. Great. Or link it. Yeah. I saw your YouTube videos. I went on that was the first thing I did. I'm like,
I need to make like more
30
of those.
seconds
Those
long, like 15 seconds long. I was like, it's not, I mean, I saw the length first and I thought, how is this guy getting his responses down to like 15 seconds? I gotta get on that train. That's about the attention span that you can hold.
Yeah, well, so like I when I first started doing those, it was because my brother Ray he's a wonderful guy. He's a Baptist. God bless him. I'm in the South, so we all are, except me, But he posted some video on Facebook and was this long video about, is the coin shortage a sign of the end times? And it was really thoughtful, really well done, all this like biblical exegesis that he did that was really, he handled the book of Revelation with great care, and it was just a wonderful video, but it was like 25-30 minutes long, and I was like, damn, it's a lot easier to just say no. Like,
yeah,
that's where you end up at the end of the day. So I just thought, well, I'll do that. And so then I made, and people love them. I need to make more. People think they're funny.
Well, that was originally my thought was, okay, I spend an inordinate amount of time on the internet arguing with people of different denominations and beliefs. And I found that I would keep running into the same sort of arguments over and over. So, I mean, Facebook, I would recommend nobody ever use it. It's just, hive of scum and villainy. But especially those Lutheran groups on Facebook. I love the Lutherans in there, but there are a lot of people in there who have nothing to do but just be angry with one another. And then, but
I saw a guy in one. I'm sorry, I saw a guy in one of those groups the other day who, how they do the polls. Do you, which way do you face when you say the whatever, and they have and then the third option is always Semper Virgo.
Yeah.
And they do that because they're saying adiaphora, right? Like it doesn't matter, just whatever works for you. That's why they because Semper Virgo itself is adiaphora, and so that's what they're saying there. It's just, it doesn't matter. I saw a dude actually trying to argue against Semper Virgo because it was one of the poll options on the Facebook. I was like, bro, do you not get the joke? Have you not been here?
Yeah, we would do that in a seminary. I don't know if you're still planning on going to. Were you going to St. Louis, or were you interested?
No, I'm in the AALC.
Okay, yeah.
So I will be going.
Fort Wayne
Yep, I will
campus
be
is
going
shared.
to
Yeah.
ALTS. Yeah, I will be going to
Yeah.
ALTS online, which is shared with Fort Wayne. That
Yeah. I
should
think
be in about a year.
Cooper is there. Yeah.
Yep,
We would.
Cooper's.
I haven't.
He's our
I
president.
think he moved there before, or he moved there after I graduated. So I've never had the opportunity to meet him in person. I mean,
I don't
I would have
know.
to
I don't know that he
resist.
lives up there.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing is I don't know. I mean, I've seen his office from the inside, but I have no clue where he is aside from that. I know that there
Yeah.
is an AALC office on campus.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think my father-in-law
That's
owns that.
actually our like home office or whatever. The LCMS was kind enough to let us borrow a portion of Fort Wayne, and
Yeah,
that's actually the office you saw was probably Dr. Lyons, the president of the AALC.
yeah. I don't think I think
That
I
was
drove
probably
past
his
it on.
office.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
had a sign to AALC. I said, oh, the other
yeah,
Lutherans
yeah.
are here.
We're like headquartered. Yeah, we're like headquartered out of Fort Wayne.
Yeah,
Um, we have a nice working relationship, I think, with the LCMS. We're an alternate pulpit fellowship. We actually in the AALC. I mean, I don't know if it's a problem necessarily, but we need pastors because we have a lot of AALC churches that don't have pastors, but we have a lot of pastors that are staffing LCMS churches right now, and it's like,
like yeah. No, I think Dr. Cooper had a video on it. Was a while back. He had a video on why doesn't the ALC join the LCMS? And the first, I was curious too. And I think he explained it.
yeah,
He said, well, there's the historical development, even though the doctrine is the same, the historical development is different, and it's worth preserving. That there was this, it turns out, parallel sort of line of Lutheran development, and
yeah,
just shows how right we are as Lutherans. And I said, you know
yeah,
what, fine. That makes perfect sense to me.
yeah.
So, but I don't think I'll
I
be
think a
switching
lot
over
of
to
it.
AALC. I think I'll stick with LCMS for a while until
Yeah, no,
until I get
it's
kicked out for
fine.
denying Semper. Well, to be fair, I don't deny Semper Virgo. I don't affirm or deny it. I specifically take whichever position is going to cause the most consternation. But I have been
Oh,
called a
okay,
heretic more on
okay.
that issue than any other.
Yeah, that's a wild issue. I think a lot of times when it comes to like Semper Virgo debates in person, I hold to whatever position is going to get me out of this conversation the fastest. um,
Well,
but
yeah, at
in
seminary
real
there was always
life,
beer involved in these conversations. When you're on Facebook,
yeah,
it's not as
well, there
much
has to
fun.
be.
Yeah.
No,
No.
no, my wife asked me to stop drunkenly shouting at my computer, and
Yeah, you got to
what
do
can
that in
you do?
person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
No,
but
I've
it's
got. Yeah, that's the issue. That's the issue that will divide the synod. Nothing important, but that issue. No.
yeah. It's no, I mean, really, it's wild. It's wild how a lot of people. I think a lot of people want to be trad for trad's sake,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And they don't actually care whether or not the position is theologically correct or theologically sound. They just want to be, and I think that's why we lose a lot of people to Rome or to the East. I think more to the East than to Rome,
Yeah.
because you can have your tradition and not your pope. So it's
No,
great.
that's what we were. I mean, again, going back to that was what we were told at seminary is the Smells and Bells crowd goes over, to the east, and the ones who can't quite stand the ELCA go over to Rome and ended up doing Novus
Yeah,
Ordo over there. Yeah, but
it's
yeah.
so sad because like we have truth over here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Truth isn't always. It ends up taking a second fiddle to identity, and I guess there's not enough identity to be found in I believe the truth. There's more identity to be found in I'm a rad trad who believes rad trad stuff that happens to be true.
Right.
But yeah, and I think
Well, that's pride.
it is, and it's and this is one of the reasons. I mean, I don't want to say that there's a noble reason why I pick the fight of Semper Virgo as often as I do, because most of the time it's just entertainment. But a lot of the time I'm uncovering idols, or what I perceive as idols. Now again, not saying Semper Virgo is absolutely true or false, but the fact that if you ask the question, why do you believe this, the answers are sometimes concerning. Sometimes it's just, the answer I usually get, is, well, Martin Luther believed it. Well, yeah, Martin Luther believed a lot of things. We don't subscribe to the doctrine of sola Luther. We subscribe, right? And they said, well, how can you deny this pious, and that's the word that's thrown in all the time, this pious doctrine? It's pious. How can you deny it? It's pious. And so, well, just saying the word pious over and over doesn't make it. It's like, I declare bankruptcy. You have to actually go, right. I declare it. It's like, I declare Semper Virgo is pious. It's like, yes, but show where this doctrine came from. And some of the people who've done some of the digging, I really respect how they've come to their conclusion. And one of the sources for this doctrine is the Proto-Evangelion of James. It's a pseudepigraphal book. It's a book that we wouldn't take any information from otherwise, but it says all of this stuff like it affirms like clauso utero and all these other things, that Mary was pregnant, and then there was a flash of light, and behold, she was holding the Christ child, and Salome was there for some reason, and she verified that physically that Mary was still pregnant, or Mary was fit the virgin requirements or whatever. And with this information we get from this book that we wouldn't trust otherwise. So my initial thought was, okay, well, let's just not trust it, right? But the competent argument I've seen made from that is they say, well, look, the fact that this pseudepigraphal account was written and that so many people still believe this thing afterwards shows that it was a common enough belief in the Christian church early on. So I say, okay, maybe there was somebody who knew Joseph or Mary, and maybe they got this information and it wasn't written down, and it very well could have been true. But most people never dig to find the source of the doctrine, and they'll just say, well, here's a list of church fathers who believed it. Here's a way that you can translate the word brother to mean cousins or half brothers or whatever, which I think that's a completely different argument. Just because, even if Jesus didn't have any subsequent siblings from Mary, doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't have a biblical marriage, Joseph and Mary. But it's so quickly just used as a jumping off point to say, look, here I am believing this pious traditional thing, and here you are, and I'm going to ascribe to you every negative aspect that I can. So I was called a contemporary worship modernist. I was called a postmodernist and a modernist. Somebody called me a heretic and told me I should review my call documents. They said, "Wow, you see the small called articles refer to her as the ever Virgin Mary and stuff." But it was this thing where I was asking a question. So, okay, so why is this belief real? How, I assume, you being AALC, you're a fan of Dr. Jordan Cooper. I watch his videos religiously, but he will go back and he's got all these books on his shelf, and he'll say, well, here's this, Ante-Nicene church father, and he'll find this quote, and he'll say, and this is the origin, and this is the first time we could find a prayer to Mary or whatever, and he'll go back and he'll look at the origin. And it shouldn't be a controversial topic to say, show me where your belief comes from. It's not enough simply to say, look, these other holy people believed it. That can add to its credibility, but if you can't show the source of it, then you've got an issue that you have to wrestle with. You have to be able to say, well, maybe there's a good source, maybe there's not a good source. Adiaphora is probably the appropriate solution to that. But it's still fun to argue.
I commented, I think on one of your YouTube videos about I believe it, but I'm not going to fight you about it,
Yeah.
And
fine, yeah.
I grew up like rabid Protestant, Pentecostal holiness, and just
so you don't like Mary is what you're saying, right?
Yeah. Well, anything to do with Catholicism, no.
Yeah.
Growing up, no, didn't like it at all. And it almost came down to like an insult contest against Mary when Semper Virgo is brought up. And I don't know, maybe it's just reactionary out of that where I'm just like, well, you know what? This is something that's, if it's true, is a good thing, and it's not a bad thing. It's to what great dedication to the Lord. And so, if it's a way that I can, Mary's due some honor, right?
Right,
She's
right.
due some, and as Lutherans, I think we have a hard time with that. The Catholics go like full in, crank the dial to 11. Let's dive
Oh, you
in
see, it's the
here.
difference between latria and hyperdulia, and it's like, yes, we worship her, but not the way that it's a different word for worship, and there's this like minute distinction that yeah. Well,
In
and that
practice, that
in practice,
distinction
it's a yeah,
disappears. It's a
yeah, and there's
verbal
a
only distinction. But I mean, at the end of the day, though, like Mary is due some kind of honor and respect. If nothing else, though, the one thing the Catholics nail uh, dead on is that Mary is, and I suppose Christ himself, who knows, this is all beyond our comprehension, I think, as people, but in some way, she's like the ark, right?
mhm.
Carrying the new covenant, carrying Christ within her. And I don't know, man, like that's important. That's something we shouldn't just gloss over, I think. So
Yeah, it's
I don't
like
know. It's just,
it's and Luther does this all the time in his sermons. Is he'll sometimes it feels like he just makes these things up, and he'll make a comparison between two things that seem otherwise unconnected, but then
right.
he spins it into this thing where comparing Mary to the ark, and what would that imagery be able to tell you about what are the similarities between it, Mary and the new Eve? What's the difference between
Hmm.
and the Mary and Eve and the faithfulness that they showed or didn't show. And that's one of the ones that I like to use a lot, seeing that from
Yeah.
Eve, all his sin came, and then from Mary we have the one, through one man sin entered the world, and then death, and through one man, Jesus, the process
Hmm.
is reversed. But then it gets kind of complicated, because you can only take the analogy so far, because if Mary is the new Eve and Jesus is the new Adam, then that gets a little weird. And
So
yeah.
yeah, so Jesus, this is one of my favorite things about Jesus. He's God. Okay. So he
Yeah, that is a little
never,
important. Yeah.
yeah, but he never misspeaks, right? Everything he
Right.
says is perfect. He doesn't misspeak. He says the thing that he needs to say the way it should be said. And we see this, you can only take the analogy so far before it breaks down, because we're talking about things that are beyond earth, that are beyond reality as we know it, as we are able to comprehend it. And so like you see this a lot in the parables where the analogy breaks down,
Yeah.
so it's like the wedding feast where like the people don't show up, so then he goes out and just any beggar on the street come in and eat and all this. And then finally the guests show up, and it's like, so the master that was throwing the feast, because they were late, decided to throw them into outer darkness where there was weeping and gnashing of teeth. And it's like, well, that doesn't, I've never had that happen to
Right.
me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like
You
it kind
can
of
burn on your
breaks down at
deathbed.
the end.
Yeah. That just means deathbed conversions all go to hell. That's what I, yeah, that's the proper exegetical step to take there.
Official LCMS doctrine. You heard it
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
folks.
Yeah, you're gonna I'm gonna put that into a Book of Concord too, Electric Boogaloo.
Yeah, yeah. I, I often ask my charismatic friends when they say, like, they'll post something, like Instagram, and it's like, oh, the Lord spoke to me this morning and said, XYZ.
Right, right.
And I'll, just to be, a jerk, I'll be like, cool, can I write that into my Bible? I got some blank pages in the back. Is that what they're for?
Oh boy, yeah, the margins. That's why you get the note Bibles or whatever. They have all the extra space that people draw on the side.
Yeah.
You're supposed to write your verses in there. God's speaking to you in your
Yeah, you're the New Testament.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. When we get into Mormon territory. Yeah. Well, and the other problem is, how do you write feelings down? Because sometimes I feel like the Lord wants me to. I get a feeling, Lord wants, I
Mhm.
feel. If you watched Chris Roseborough before,
Oh
Pastor
yeah,
Roseborough,
he's AALC.
Yeah, he does. He was part of the inspiration behind behind my channel. But he'll talk about how the ineffective Holy Spirit, where he can kind of communicate, but not really. Like
Right,
everything is
right.
better in the new covenant, except the Holy Spirit just can't really talk. He just kind of goes, I want to give you a feeling, but
Yeah,
yeah. No,
yeah.
I saw he had the pirates locked down. The pirate thing. His whole thing was pirate Christian radio. And then of course Fisk had the ninjas locked down. And I thought, well, you know what? Nobody's claimed paladins yet. So I staked my
There we
claim on
go.
paladins. And so that's
The pagans grabbed Vikings.
oh, they can have Vikings. If you read the
Yeah.
stories of Odin and stuff, they're not all great.
They're not great.
Yeah,
They're not great.
it's like Zeus or whatever. It's like he wasn't. I mean, I've seen the Disney movie. That's fun, but that in their own stories, he's not a good guy.
No, no. And I had one of those Facebook arguments one time, and the person said they were like, "Oh, our pagan gods are so great," or whatever. And like, never mind the fact that if Disney holds the copyright on your god, like your religion is lame, dude,
Yeah,
lame. But he said something about the only reason we don't know more about pagan mythology is because you Christians burned everything.
oops.
And I said, yeah. Well, I said actually we didn't, believe it or not. Boniface cut down a tree, and
Yep.
then they said, "Oh, so I guess our gods are fake," because he wasn't immediately struck by
Yeah.
lightning. Um, so they all converted, and they actually brought their own books out to burn. And Boniface and the Catholic Church said, no, we want to preserve your history. Don't burn your books. And they were like, well, nah, it's all fake anyway. And so they burned their own books. We didn't burn their books.
Yeah.
That was just a result of conversion.
Yeah, that happens sometimes. It's interesting if you go back. It's all portrayed as, well, depending on who's portraying it, it's portraying as you Christians came in and conquered, and St. Patrick killed all the pagans in Ireland or something like that. And it's like, no, I mean, we actually do have some recorded history of what happened, and the conversion is often okay, well, we'll burn our idols because they're obviously idols, and let's follow your and you've got accounts of that in the Bible as well, where you've got people who are leaving other cultures and being kind of adopted into Christianity, or the Old Testament version of Christianity. But yeah,
which I just call Christianity, just to upset people.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah, I specifically use terms like that. You can, the Old Testament Christians, and whether or not they knew, well, they would have, well, I guess Christ, they would have been Messiah-ins. I guess, I don't know, that Christ is just the Greek version of the Hebrew word for word Messiah. It's literally just the chosen anointed one, which I've heard people call them all Yahwists before, but okay. I mean, I just refer to them as the faith. If I have to give a sermon and I'm referring to the people in the Old Testament, I just call them the faithful. If I'm picking a fight with somebody, I might call them the Christians. But then again, I found if you want to pick a fight with the right guys, and I'm not saying to pick a fight. I'm not saying. I'm just saying is all I'm saying. If you happen to refer to Martin Luther as a church father, there are some people who take offense to that for some reason. But I think it fits, right? He was a padre, because we've got the Ante-Nicene church fathers, and so he's just the Reformation church father. He's just he's one of them, right?
I'm fine with that. I'm fine. I'm fine with. So here's the thing, like, I'm willing to define patristics, like, mathematically, as like this year minus 200 is patristic theology. Anything from 1822 back, I'm going to call you a church father, because you're out of living memory at that point. So let's go.
And for some reason or another, your theology has persisted. Either it's heretical and we're keeping it to laugh at, or, there's actually, like, I got Pieper and stuff back there. There's some of them that they wrote some things worth reading. And you don't have to be super old to do that, it turns out.
I'm finishing my undergrad at Liberty University, and it's always fun to be the Lutheran at the Baptist College. I quote so much Pieper, because
Oh
like
boy.
you can't. He's too smart. He's too smart. I just hands down. Okay, I don't know like when theologians dropped off. I don't know when that happened. I think there are a few theologians that are very, very good. Modern day theologians that I would put on par with church fathers. Brian Wolfmueller,
Mm.
probably up there, right? Like there's a few of them that are good, but I don't know, like it's just dropped off, and I don't know, maybe it's always been like this, I haven't been around to know, but I have to use Pieper and I lean on him so much in like my papers and stuff because like you can't argue with it. He's too smart. You just can't argue with him. You're not going to win.
Yeah, and he's dealing with he's dealing with a lot of the same arguments that we're encountering today. You'll have maybe towards the end of Luther's life, and some of Melanchthon and Chemnitz and stuff deal with a lot of the enthusiasts, the people who become the Calvinists and Reformed, but most of the work that they've dealt with is Roman Catholic theology. When we get
Yeah.
to the Americas and later on, a lot of it is, this American brand of sort of Baptist, Calvinist, Reformed, sort of Methodist offshoot theology. And I guess this is the new frontier. We have yet to get to a place where the Lutherans have really gone toe to toe with the Eastern Orthodox. But I think, at least so far, there's enough documentation between Lutherans and Roman Catholics and Lutherans and Reformed Baptists and stuff that it really I think we have so many theologians that eventually over time we realize that some of them are brilliant, and not all of them. And that's what I'm hoping, is that God is continuing to kind of place these brilliant theologians in every few generations, and then we'll get a book and we'll read it. And of course, me being LCMS, I'm going to say, oh, well, we've got David Scare, and if anybody's familiar with him, he's this theologian that everybody's familiar, and he's taught, been teaching for decades and decades, but and his writings on baptism and some of the best explanations of Christian baptism I've ever read in any of these books. But I'd like to think that God continues to sprinkle brilliant theologians in here and there, and we keep discovering them. Say, oh, this guy's great! I can't wait to read everything that he writes. And yeah.
Unfortunately, that's none of like the 50 people listening to my podcast.
Yeah, who knows? I don't know.
They're like, oh, this guy is there.
Yeah.
He's out there. He's saying things.
Yep. Just scream into the void loud enough, and the void will echo back.
That's the plan. That's the plan. I think I actually had that conversation with Feeney.
Yeah, it has to start somewhere. Feeney. I think I listened to your interview with Feeney, and he said something along the same lines. And if you pay attention to the way Lutheran satire started out, now it's this huge thing, but when it started out, it was just he's making jokes and it's this little thing, and it grows. I've seen, looking back at, I'll scroll back to Dr. Cooper's original videos. Past the ones with the yo-yo ones, those are cool. But when you get to like the original videos on his channel, because nobody ever scrolls to the first few videos, but they're like, 4 to 50 views. And then you go to these ones now and you get thousands of people watching these videos, and you just see how much God has blessed his ministry over these years, that he's continued to just do it. And it's never turned into some sort of gimmicky thing with a lot of these guys. It's just persistence. Worldview Everlasting, that was going on for a while. I was watching Worldview Everlasting when there was a bunch of different pastors, and I know they kind of split up and they're doing their own things now. But there's something to be said with, everybody thinks you have to be a movie star to you have to start at 10,000 subscribers, but that's never the case of anybody I've ever seen in any of these theologians. They're always, okay, well, I'm already doing my sermon, I may as well share my sermon with other people, and eventually you've got somebody tells somebody, hey, you can get the truth here, this is useful, and it grows. So I try to encourage other pastors as much as I can to say, hey, you've already done your work on your sermon. If you've already written a Bible study, record it, because someone out there with a 7-minute attention span would love to have access to what you give on Sunday, because you worked hard for that.
Yeah.
And now that we have the internet, that's how people learn. That's how people come into church. They find your church on Google Maps, and they've seen your sermons on your Facebook page. I don't think it's necessarily the evil of technology. I think we can embrace this tool that God has given us to reach more people, as long as we don't let it compromise our faith and our content.
I think another key to internet pastoring is pushing people to real pastoring.
Yes.
Yes.
Videos are not a substitute for having a pastor.
Exactly. And emailing some guy from the internet is not a substitute for having a pastor. And every internet pastor I know that does a good job at it will always tell you, hey, go talk to your pastor about this. If you don't have one, I'll find you one. But I'm not the guy you need to talk to about, whatever your divorce or whatever you're going through. That's someone else.
Yeah.
So I that's important. And in that way, it's good, because it helps. This sort of international platform helps us grow locally as we grow sort of globally, right?
Right. Well, and it's almost a degree of brand recognition as well. Somebody who's not a Christian at all, if they're not a Christian, they're not going to know what a Lutheran is unless they live in the Midwest. And they start seeing, they start listening to podcasts, and they start watching videos and stuff about theology, and they say, wow, I never thought about it this way, or wow, this is great. This leads me to either continue to watch or listen, or hopefully to start reading the Bible, and how do I get more of this? And if they can find out that this is available at every Lutheran church, hopefully, then they don't have to have a single podcast that they watch, once a week or something, or listen to once a week. They say, well, I get to go to a church and I get to interact with all kinds of people who believe that, and the pastor who can explain that exact same topic. It's fantastic. But if they're not being funneled towards local churches, the temptation is often, I don't need to go to church, I can watch it online.
Yeah.
That's why I don't live stream my whole service. The sermons go online.
So but, we do. And we're divided on this as a church. I spearheaded the live stream because I'm the, I do web design and stuff. I have a podcast. So I'm the default tech guy.
Yeah.
And so I spearheaded this live stream, me and another guy. But now the more I think about it, the more I wish we didn't live stream our sermon at all, because so many people really do just stay home just for no reason.
And that's the question. And I don't think that we could have necessarily answered that going in. I think so. COVID made for a lot of pastors, the LCMS was funding. It was actually, they had programs to fund, webcams and live streaming. So they'll help you set these things up. And the question then that developed after that is, okay, well, we're live streaming our entire services. If people don't completely understand, if they don't understand the sacraments, if we're not clear that you have to be here to receive the sacraments, if we're not clear on the benefits of going to church and having fellowship with your fellow Christians, if you don't understand that these are all blessings that you need to be in church to receive, whether it's a building or meeting in the catacombs or whatever, people will say, well, I get everything I need on YouTube, and by the way, I can speed it up to 1.75 percent or 1.75 times speed. And that's what I do with all my videos. And I can get more sermon per hour than the people who go to church. So the
which
danger,
blows my mind, because at our church we're in and out in 54 minutes. So I don't know.
I try to keep my sermons. At the most, they'll be, if I've really got something that I have to bring home, it can go as long as 20 minutes. But I've seen pastors do brilliantly with more and brilliantly with less. A lot of it, the pastor has to know their congregation. They have to know, okay, what's the attention span of this congregation? How how much can I give them? In the homiletics class, we would talk about, there's only so many things you can juggle at a time. You hand somebody a ball, it's like a concept. They get it. You can hand somebody 2, they get it. When you get them 3, it starts getting difficult until you can find how they're all connected. So you have to limit the amount of content, and it has to be directed. It has to be finely chiseled. Like, what's your point, and how are all these other things you're saying connected to the point? But I think each pastor knows it's a family. Each family, they know best. This congregation, if you go to Fort Wayne or you go to St. Louis, there are congregations out there that can juggle all of these $5 Latin theological terms without dropping the ball, and they're just used to that. And there's other congregations you go to, and they need a more direct, simple approach, and then they'll go and they'll chew on what you give them or what God gives them for the rest of the week. So you can't say, oh, well, your sermon was only 10 minutes, it wasn't enough. No, for this congregation, it was enough, because mentally they continue to process it. So, but it depends on the congregation, and it depends on, and the pastor has to be able to kind of figure that out. And feedback is helpful, but it's also dangerous to ask for feedback. Yeah. Once you open that door,
dangerous for the pride, I think.
Yeah, in both ways. I would say if you've got a congregation that loves you and they say, yeah, the sermon was fantastic, you're like, yeah, it was fantastic because I'm a fantastic pastor.
Right. Yeah.
The opposite of that, of course, being, you say, I want feedback on it. And, Pastor, that sermon was boring and I hated it. And it's like, okay, well, it hurt my feelings, but I can't improve.
I'm not a real person anyway. It's fine.
Yeah. I'm just, Well, I only work 1 hour a week as it is.
That's it. Yeah.
I just do origami and paper airplanes the rest of the time. Throw origami boulders into my trash can. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is a set. This is just a flat wall right here. There's no books. There's lighting up. But I'm on the beach
painted.
Right now. Yeah. It's
I like that you took the time when you had the artist paint all of those fake books in the background. You took the time to make sure they were all CPH books. Attention to detail.
They've got, unfortunately, I've got some shelves that I have to clean out. Because I've got some books. I need to get, there's a stamp that I've seen people use where it says heresy, don't read. And I need to get those because I've got a few books here that are just like it's like my 7 minutes dead. I've been dead for 7 minutes or whatever. And I met God, like those kind of things, like Heaven is Real and Purpose Driven Life. And these other books that people say, you've got to read this book. It's, it's changed my life. And it's heresy before you even open up. You're like, yeah, I know that guy. And he writes, everything he writes is trash, but you have to know you have to read trash sometimes to know what the people, because the people will come to you and they'll say, look, here's a purpose-driven life. They sell more copies than anything but the Bible. It must be good. What do you think about it? And if you're not familiar with it, then you're going to have either an answer that's going to offend them. You say, it's stupid, I'm not going to read it because I hate Rick Warren. Or you're going to say, it's popular, therefore it must be good. I'm sure somebody would have called him out if it was something bad. And that's the difficult part, is having extra time to wade through things that you would not read on purpose. Like you go into it knowing that there's going to be some objectionable content to it.
Right.
But I did that with, what was that?
I was going to say how as a pastor, how do you deal with that when someone comes to you and they're like, Reverend, I read The Shack and it changed my life. Like, what do you do?
Well, I'll tell you, what am I supposed to do, or what have I done? But
yes.
I've definitely, in the past, and this was a mistake I made. I mean, I haven't been a pastor for that long, but I've already made my share of mistakes. Somebody came in, and it was a purpose-driven life, and somebody noticed it on the shelf. And this is, I inherited the bookshelf from the previous pastor, and I've added my own. And they said, oh, something about I gestured behind me. I said, we've got some heretical stuff. I don't want to gesture to people when I say that, but there's some books over here, some heretical nonsense. And I gesture to it, and they said, a purpose-driven life, I've read that. I'm like, it's trash or something. And then I offended these people terribly, and it was awful because I didn't realize, I put my foot so far into my mouth, I didn't realize that this person had come in, and this was, they were at the stage where they needed milk, not meat. They couldn't chew on that. And I knew only enough about the book to know it was bad. I've read snippets of it here and there, but I hadn't read it cover to cover. So I couldn't tell them. And if they had said, well, I like this part or I like that part, I would have been completely ignorant. I couldn't have said, this is the good stuff, this is the bad stuff, this is the stuff, whatever. But there's so many bad books out there and so many books that are good and bad that you can't read them all, especially if you're reading a lot of good theology. So you have to pick and choose. I would say that I very poorly handled the purpose-driven life conversation, very poorly. And in the future, what I want to do is I want to go through it and do something called the purpose given life. And I want to contrast. I want to go page by page, chapter by chapter, and contrast the kind of works righteousness, fruit checking stuff with your value comes from God. But I haven't had the time to do that yet. I did get through the Jordan Peterson books. I don't know if you've read those or not. So he's got. Are you familiar with Jordan Peterson? He's a Canadian psychologist.
Yeah, I see he's sort of thinking himself around to Jesus, which I think is pretty cool.
It's fascinating to watch the journey, and he's honest enough that you can watch the progress. And I think people are jumping the gun a lot when they're saying, well, see, he's Christian. And there's clips of him talking about it where he's frustrated because he thinks on one hand, the latest I saw was it's undeniable that, he knows that, Jesus is real, but he thinks that there is, and he talks about it as a historical event and kind of the mythos, a theology, a greater philosophical concept being married together in this Jesus character, where yes, he was a historical figure, but at the same time, his mere existence suggests some sort of mythological or theological thing, and he has to come to grips with it. So he doesn't. I don't think he's yet at the stage where he says the Bible is God's word and it is true. He's at the stage where, and I don't think this is the right stage. I think it's Carl Jungian philosophy. I'm not a fan of Jung, where he says, well, it is the embodiment of truth. It is so important that it may as well be true. It's one of these, like, I don't even know how to describe it, like this I don't know, this truth that transcends. It's so important of a story that it doesn't matter if it really happened or not, because the moral is what we have to get from it. But
so I saw a video.
Yet.
I think he's at the place where he's looking at this and he's saying, how can this not be true? Like, he doesn't necessarily believe it, but like, how can I not be believing this? This has to be believed. But he's now wrestling with, if I believe this, what does that mean for me? Right?
Exactly. And it's not something where he can dip a toe in. You have to to fall
you're in or out.
You're either you either believe or you don't. And the video,
especially his personality type, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is if something is true, then he believes that he has a moral obligation to believe that it is true. So if he comes to the conclusion that this is, and this is something where he's teetering on the edge of the pool, and he's looking down into the water, not knowing how deep it is, and not knowing if he can swim, and not knowing what will happen if he falls in. I think I'm thinking of the same interview. He says he's terrified of the consequences of if it is true, because if the Bible is true, then this tells you not only a lot about Jesus, but this tells you about yourself and the universe and the purpose behind things and sin and everything else. So I pray for him. From what I've seen so far, I don't know if there's any further development. I believe his wife is Christian at this point, and she wasn't before. And I think God is working through him. And I think it's actually a real benefit for Christians, not to look at him and say, look at this guy, he's a Christian, and look at how smart he is, therefore we got the good guys on our side. But to look at the honesty and the self-examination that he's going through this, and these are the conflicts that somebody will go through, and they'll say, well, if this is true, what does this mean? How does this apply to me? And people can really resonate with that. And they say, I've struggled with these same questions too. And the fact that this genius doctor is struggling with these things and not just jumping in and saying it's true, it's false. I think it's a benefit to people, and encouraging to people to say, keep reading the Bible, keep talking with pastors, keep getting into the theology, because you haven't gotten to the bottom of it yet.
It's interesting. He actually recently followed Dr. Cooper on Twitter,
Oh, that's
um,
fantastic. I've been waiting for
which
that
is
crossover episode for a long time.
yeah, for a long time. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Just type
the two
Dr. Jordan
Jordans. Yeah,
B in Dr. Jordan B in YouTube, and they've got competing channels.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I saw a video of him on the TikTok, which is, you say Facebook is awful. Don't even go near TikTok. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Uh, it's unreal. Um, all I do is watch cat videos. I'm a big cat person. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and all I do is like watch these cat videos, but like you still they inundate you with like trash,
Yeah.
almost like forcefully. But I saw a video of Peterson on there, and it's just like a student filming a lecture of his, like at college, and he shows this graph of the Bible, and it's all of the verses of the Bible on a line graph and all the different connections and intersections that every verse has. And it's massive, it's mind-blowing. And he's pointing to this and he's saying, this is a book written by dozens of different people over thousands of years. How is this possible? How can you have this cohesive of a narrative in one book written by people that were separated by hundreds of years?
Yeah.
How? It's not possible. It's not.
And there's nothing
But
to compare
here
it
it
to.
is.
Yeah,
No, there's
no other religion that has anything even remotely comparable. If you have like the closest thing you have is the Jewish
Lord of the
Talmudic,
Rings.
Lord of the Rings. Yeah, well, but that's written by one guy, and then
Yeah.
the rest of the stuff. Yeah, but and then Peter Jackson comes. But I mean, so you've got like the rab, and these are different rabbis over a period of time, and they would disagree with one another. There isn't coherence between all of these rabbis who study in these various Jewish Judaisms, these various sects. Any other major religion, you've got Islam, you have the Quran, which obviously it wasn't written directly by Muhammad, but it was dictated from Muhammad, and then the later hadiths are written by his followers, Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, all these other ones. But those disagree with each other, which is why even in Islam you'll have different groups. I mean, Sunni and Shia is a big division, but you've got these different groups of these different people who will say, well, these books are not authoritative. It would be if somebody said, well, I don't, Matthew and Romans and Ephesians, those are not authoritative, but Mark and John or whatever. So there's no coherency like there is with the Bible, the Christian. I mean, there are some divisions when you get to what about the Deuterocanon, the Apocrypha, in the Old Testament, or in the New Testament? What about the distinction between the Homolegomena and the Antilegomena? Or I'm probably saying it wrong, but these distinctions between the books, but it's never to this point where it's never like. Well, I know the joke is that Luther tried to take all these books out of the Bible. He tried to rip these books out of the Bible, and thankfully those Catholics prevented him from ripping the books out of the Bible. But
by adding them after the Reformation. I just want to point that out for anyone that doesn't know. Anyone that doesn't know, those books, the Apocrypha was declared canonical after the Reformation. For anyone that doesn't know that was not something Luther removed. That was something the Catholics added. Okay.
To be fair, Saint Jerome, the translator of the Latin Vulgate, he used the term. He made the distinction between the Deuterocanon and the Old Testament canon. He referred to them as the Apocrypha. And if people will proof text Jerome, and they'll say, "Well, look here, he rejected these books," and later on he says, "No, he accepted these books." His position and his explanation of them changed over time, but he and plenty others noticed that there was a difference between these books that ended with Malachi and the books that were written in the intertestamental period by unknown authors and unconfirmed sources. And some of them containing things that we believe are not true. There is some difference there. I mean, Luther still said that he translated them to German as well. They were included in the Lutheran Bible, the German version of the Lutheran Bible. You can get a CPH copy of the Apocrypha. I don't know if I've got mine here.
I have one,
but no, it's at home, I think. But yeah, you can. I mean, and he says that Christians ought to read them, if for nothing else, than a historical understanding of what happened in between these two things. But even still, like that's nothing compared to these other religions where, they'll say, well, this prophet was, it would be like, yeah, the Apostle John was, don't listen to anything he wrote. That's the equivalent in Islam when they say, well, don't listen to Sahih al-Bukhari, or don't listen to Bukhari,
Right.
because everything he wrote was nonsense. And the coherency, of the Bible is solid.
It's interesting to me because just listening to you talk about this, I realized that the textual critical view of Scripture that the ELCA and the more mainline liberal denominations take, that's like they have to work. They have to really fight to get textual criticism to be accepted as a valid interpretation of Scripture. Whereas with things like Islam or even rabbinical Judaism, textual criticism is like your starting point.
Yeah.
We all just assume that it's a load of crap and we have to sort out the fly turd from the pepper, as it were. Whereas with historic Christianity, it's like the opposite is true. Like I do this thing in online arguments when I get in arguments with people. I do this thing where I'm just gonna take like the most like obtuse pro-Bible view I can. If someone wants to argue like long 6-day creation, I'm like, the earth is only 4,000 years old and St. Paul wrote the entire Bible.
Yeah, there you go.
Like whatever like the exact opposite of textual criticism is, like that's what I'm doing.
And it was all written in the King James version. Yeah.
It was, absolutely. Absolutely.
I
had an argument
through the Book of Maps. Yeah. It's all King James.
I had an argument with a guy on Twitter the other day, and he kept talking about like, oh, well, what about this contradiction, and what about that error, and what about this and that and the other thing? And I was like, yeah, guy, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm just reading the Bible. Do you need a copy? I can send you one.
I run into those frequently. I let others know that I'm a reverend online in my various platforms and fake names that I do, and people will come up and they'll have they'll go to whatever atheist, they'll go to Reddit and they'll go to atheist/atheism or whatever. I assume that's where they're all born. I don't go to Reddit for the same reason I don't use Instagram or TikTok, but. Yeah, so and then they'll come in, they'll, haha, what about this contradiction? How can you this proves that the Bible is false because this and they've got a list of, 10 contradictions, or if they've got, one of the websites that's collected all of the contradictions in the Bible. It's like 1 million contradictions and stuff. And you could go through, you would answer a contradiction, and they just move on to the next one. And the next time they have an argument with the same Christian, let's say they only make it 17 contradictions into their list, the next Christian they argue with, they'll start at contradiction number 1 again. You don't actually make any progress with these
Well, because
things.
they don't want to believe. They want to hate. Yeah. They want to disbelieve. Yeah.
And this is, and so the more you pare down their list, the more you remove their justification for disbelief. They say, well, I can't believe because look at this impressive long list of all these things where the Bible contradicts itself. The problem is that Google is a thing. And if you Google their arguments and you Google their, you search for their, their contradictions, there are tomes written already addressing these things. Every time somebody comes up with, if God real, why bad thing happened, it just, it baffles the mind. It's just, have you not, have you heard of the problem of evil before? Have you heard of the Epicurean paradox? Have you, these things have been discussed for thousands of years. You're not the first. Exactly. So it's not, but they don't, a lot of time, I'm fine if somebody comes and they ask a question and they want to know the answer to it. But if they come and the questions are just ammunition, say, look, this is why the Bible isn't true, and they haven't done the due diligence to kind of look it up and see if they can find an answer, and they won't be interested in the answer if you give it to them, then it's a little bit more frustrating. It's at that point, I often would recommend to people not to just jump into ad hominem and insult them and make them cry, but also not necessarily to address their list of ammunition because it's reusable. Instead, there is an underlying reason for disbelief. I don't love apologetics. I think apologetics is extremely boring and irritating. It is very useful, and you have to be good at it. But it's not the same as. I mean, it's a necessary step sometimes.
Here's an apologetics hot take. I don't think apologetics is useful for non-Christians. I think apologetics is good for Christians
Mm-hmm.
who have doubts or fears or questions. That's where we should use apologetics. I don't think that using apologetics to argue some guy on Reddit's going to get you very far.
Well, if somebody could be convinced, could be brought to the faith through apologetics, then faith would be an intellectual accomplishment. It would be, you have to be smart. You can be smart enough to be argued into the faith. The reality is that faith is a supernatural thing, which is why even children can have it. I've got a video that's going to be coming out eventually saying, can stupid people be saved? And it's arguing against this concept of you have to intellectually understand something to have faith. But that's not the case. But I completely agree with you in terms of apologetics. It's often most useful to remove stumbling blocks for Christians. A Christian will say, well, I have faith. I trust that the Bible is true, but how do I reconcile it with this other thing? How do I reconcile it with carbon dating? How do I reconcile it with the time it takes, photons to travel from, and you can use apologetics to say, look, this is how the system actually works. There's actually not a conflict with what you believe, what Scripture says, and what this other source of information has. So I think the two uses of apologetics are primarily to remove stumbling blocks for Christians, to remove concerns and show them confidence that they can have in their faith, but also to identify vulnerabilities in other arguments. So if I'm arguing with somebody who absolutely refuses to believe, I will do my best to make it a public argument, not for their sake and not for my sake, but for the sake of the other people who are listening and trying to and they're taking in all the information. If you can use apologetics to then say, look, there's this massive hole in your armor right here, that person may not address it. That person may shift away from there, but everybody else just heard, wow, this is why this argument that this atheist makes, it falls flat. If it's, that's why you can argue about philosophically, you can argue about morality, and you can say, objective morality has to have an objective moral lawgiver. You can't, if morality is subjective, then it's just preference. And once you explain that person may not be convinced and, fall on their knees and worship Christ, but the other people around may think, wow, that is a major flaw in this other person's belief system. I should learn more. I should talk to a pastor. I should read, and hopefully God works through that, because God is the one who's giving faith, not anybody's brilliance. But correct. It has its uses, but it's I don't want to say it's an evil. I was going to say it's a necessary evil. It's an often necessary tool, but it's not a tool of evangelism. It's not a tool of creating faith.
No, correct. Yeah. Correct. We have similar kind of personalities. I don't know if you know that. I saw one of your first videos that I ever saw of you. You had the aviators on, and you were, I don't know, steamrolling some stupid memes or whatever.
Those are people's favorites. I haven't made enough of those. Those are the most requested. The second most requested video, second most requested are the do more Chad Priest destroys lame atheist arguments. The first most requested video, brace yourself for this one. The first most requested video that I have is it a sin to be a furry?
Yes, it is.
Internet people are really concerned about this question.
Yeah, I'm sure they are. I
told people, I said, I will legitimately put in the effort to make a step-by-step, it would be easy to make a 10-second video, but to put in a step-by-step video, explaining every sort of aspect of that question, if you get me to 1,000 subscribers. So I told people, I said, at 1,000, this was back when I was at 200, so I didn't think it was ever going to happen. So now I'm starting to sweat as I'm getting closer to 1,000 subscribers and saying, okay, now I've got to answer this question. And I've got to do so in such a way that it's patient and it's Christ-like, but it's also not compromising on the truth.
I think just my general rule of thumb, if you're asking, is it a sin to XYZ, just stop, because it probably is, right? If you have to ask, I don't know.
That was the thing. I've got an entire series planned. I mentioned, so I came up with a video just recently. I said, is it a sin to be asexual? Because there were people who were asking me this, and they were, younger people were legitimately concerned. They heard this term at their school. They were there was one person who asked me, she was 12, and she asked me this. She says, "Is this a sin?" And I explained to her using the language of Paul talking about his Paul's gift of singleness. But for her, it was this concept where this was an identity that you are assigned a sexual or a gender identity in school. If you don't fit into one of these categories, everybody fits into a category. What are your pronouns? What is your, attraction level? And they try to make it more and more complicated. But for her, she was terrified that because she said, okay, well, I know homosexuality is a sin. I'm terrified because I'm not attracted to that activity and other people. She's 12. She shouldn't be.
Right.
It's good that she's not involved with that. But she had been told that this was a sexual identity, and sexual identities mean LGBTQIAP plus, and she knew the aspect of sin in that. So she asked this question, expecting it fully to be a yes, and then she was going to have to struggle with, how do I deal with this and that kind of thing. So this is me contradicting you, because you're right most of the time in regards to that. If somebody says, "Is it a sin if I?" and they're trying to see how close they can get to the line, and usually the motivation is to get to the line, so that it's a sin just by the motivation. But the other question that I get, and this is more as a chaplain, a military chaplain, is it a sin to kill? And that's a question that Lutherans they can answer that. We can answer that question. And at the end of the day, if there's this is something that I learned giving the answer over and over again. Luther wrote a book, he said, or a pamphlet on whether soldiers too can be saved. It's fantastic. He talks about, he says, killing in war is like using a scalpel. You have to do violence to the body, but you save the body through the violence that's done. But talking with somebody, they had these regrets of these things that they did in the Vietnam War, and they legitimately did some bad things. They did some good things and they did some bad things. And the conclusion at the end of it all, at the end of, is it a sin to be asexual? Is it a sin to kill? Is it a sin to whatever? At the end of it, I realized how important it was to drive people back to the cross and say, whether or not it's a sin, whether or not there is an aspect of sin anywhere in here that you're not thinking about, whether or not you killed somebody and you had the right to kill him as a soldier, but you did not have the right mindset. You had a hateful, vengeful mindset when you did it, and somehow you tainted that action with your sinful nature. Christ's blood has you covered. You are forgiven for that. Your walk away at the end of every single one of these questions needs to be, okay, I understand whether or not it's a sin now a little bit better, but the important part is that I am forgiven. And that's what it's so essential, and I hope I never forget this in any conversation, that people need to be able to walk away and if they have questions, if they start thinking of questions later on, saying, but what if it is a sin because of this other aspect that I forgot to mention to the pastor? As long as they can turn back to the cross and say, but Christ died for me and paid for all of my sin, then then that's a successful conversation.
That's awesome. That's such a great insight. Reverend, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Absolutely.
I try and keep them right around an hour, so we're like right there.
Yeah, I won't start another tangent. I've got endless.
No,
I've got a whole binder full of those.
Well, I tell you what, I hope to have you back on and we can work our way through the binder. Christian
sure thing.
Combatives, that's
Christian Combatives. That's it. Yeah, Christian Combatives on YouTube. We're the only ones named that, and we have no website, we have no Facebook, and so far it's just me. But I'm hoping to get some other pastors on there as well. Absolutely. I got one other pastor who's on there, but I'm hoping to get some more. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm hoping to push you over 1,000 so we can get that furry video.
Oh boy. Yeah. There's a group of people who are actually significantly large fans of me that I found out about recently who would object to your easy answer to that question. I don't know that they'll hear this video, okay. but yeah. I tell you, furries, I hope to be patient with
furries
them.
Yeah. They're about the only group on the internet that I haven't upset by now. So it's coming anyway. I'm due for it. So
yeah,
it's fine.
Yeah, you can get there. You'll get there. Yeah.
Pastor, thank you so much.